We're going to continue our look at spelling change verbs with 3 examples of how you might use UIR spelling change verbs in the present tense. Here you will see that I have written 3 sentences for you. And above I've provided the 3 rules for conjugating verbs in the present tense, your subject pronouns, and your IR endings. And these you can use as a reference as we conjugate these verbs together. We'll begin this review by conjugating the first verb, distribuir, together, and then I'll allow you a few minutes or a few seconds to conjugate the second 2 verbs on your own. So, let's go ahead and look at number 1. Yo distribuir los papeles. Here we have a subject and a verb, and we know that our verb must be conjugated for our subject and must agree with that subject when conjugated. So, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to think to ourselves, okay, is distribuir in fact a verb that will require a spelling change? And we look at distribuir, we see that it ends in UIR. So yes, in the present tense, it will require a spelling change. Now, in order to conjugate this verb, we know that there are specific steps that we need to follow. So the first thing that we must do is find our subject. And in this sentence, we know that our subject comes before the verb, and here, that subject is yo. So we found our subject, we've completed our first task. Yo distribuir los papeles. The second thing that we must do is drop the infinitive ending from our verb. So we'll write down the stem of the verb distribuir, and that is D-I-S-T-R-I-B-U. Okay, distribu. Bear with me, I've lost my stylus, so hopefully you can read it. So we've completed the second step, we have dropped the infinitive ending, and we are left with our stem. Now, we look at step 2.5, and that asks us to add a Y. So what we'll do first, before we add the Y, we'll make sure that a spelling change is needed for this specific subject. So we'll refer to our subject pronoun list. And if we look at that subject pronoun chart, we can see that yo is written in green. And we remember that green means go for a spelling change. So distribuir in the yo form will in fact have a Y. So we'll go ahead and we will add that Y to the stem. Now the last thing that we need to do, now that we've found our subject, that it's yo, and we've added our Y, we need to add our present tense ending. So we'll look at our IR endings, because they agree with our IR verbs, and we will select O, because we know that O agrees with yo. And your verb should now look like this, distribuyo. So our sentence reads, yo distribuyo los papeles. Now you take a few moments to conjugate the second verb, distribuir, on your own. Try to follow the 3.5 steps that I have provided for you, and then we will go over the conjugation of this verb together. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to finish conjugating the verb destruir. So again, we're going to follow our 3.5 steps to conjugating this verb. The first thing we need to do, let's identify that destruir does in fact need a spelling change. It is a UIR verb, so it may require a Y spelling change. And remember, these spelling changes occur in all forms except for nosotros and vosotros. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, number 1, we're going to find our subject. And in this sentence, our subject is la guerra. Now, sometimes it can be a little confusing if we have a subject like la guerra, because we don't see that anywhere on our subject pronoun chart. We don't see the specific word la guerra. So we're going to use a little bit of critical thinking to figure this out. The first thing you can say to yourself is la guerra plural or singular? If we look at the word, we know that la is singular. So you don't have to worry about the right side or the plural side of your subject pronoun chart. So now we only have to focus on these 3 specific subject pronouns. So you can say to yourself, am I la guerra? Don't think so. Are tú la guerra? Nope. Is usted, él, ella la guerra? And you have to remember here that usted, él, ella can mean he, she, it, or you, formal. So is la guerra he, she, or it? Yes. So now we know that our subject is going to fall in this third person singular form. So the first thing that we're going to do to conjugate this verb, we have completed, and that is finding our subject. The second thing we need to do is drop our infinitive ending. So we're going to write the stem of the verb destruir. And all we do here is drop the IR. It's very common for people to want to forget to add that U, but the U needs to be in there to preserve the sound of the verb. So now we've dropped our infinitive ending and we're left with a stem. The next thing we will do is add a Y. Since we know that our subject pronoun is third person singular, we know that we can in fact add a Y because it is not nosotros or vosotros. So we've added our Y. The last thing we have to do is add our present tense ending. So again, if we look at our subject pronoun chart, we know that la guerra is third person singular. So all we have to do is look over at our IR ending chart and select the third person singular ending, and that is A. So we will just attach A to the end of that destruir stem, and that becomes destruye. All right, take a few seconds to finish up with the third example. Then we'll conjugate it together and you will be finished with your spelling changes and present tense review. Okay, let's look at our last sentence. Nosotros influir los niños. Since influir is a UIR verb, we know that it may have a spelling change in the present tense. So we're going to start conjugating the verb for the sentence, and we are first going to find our subject. So we look before the verb, and we see that our subject here is nosotros. The next thing we need to do is drop our infinitive ending, and we'll just write the stem here. I-N-F-L-U. We've just dropped the IR from the verb influir. The next thing that we need to do is add a Y. But first we have to say to ourselves, wait, our subject is nosotros. And when we look at that subject in the in the subject pronoun chart, we see that it is written in red. And red tells us to stop. We don't need to make a spelling change. So we're going to skip step 2.5 here. We're going to move right on to step 3, and that's going to be adding our present tense ending. Since we know that our subject is nosotros, we will now choose the nosotros IR ending, and that is imos. And we simply attach that to the stem of influir, and we are left with influimos. So your sentence here reads, nosotros influimos los niños. And that's it for your spelling change present tense review. If you would like more practice, you can check out the Prezi on my blog, or you can look at several of the activities I've provided you via studyspanish.com.